Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last week of our global ethics course. I can't believe it's gone by so fast. First, I want to start off by thanking you guys for doing such hard work in the course. I know it's been quite a bit of reading and maybe a little bit more than maybe you would expect out of a summer course, but I think you guys have done a fantastic job, and it's really been evident in the discussions. I think the discussions have been very thoughtful and very philosophical, and we've really covered a lot of ground in a short time. So I appreciate all your hard work, and hopefully you've gotten something out of it as well. Just briefly, last week, the topics we covered, you guys were reading and looking at topics that you had chosen as your subtopic at the beginning of the course, which I was kind of trying to get to, use the couple of theories that we had looked at concerning categorical ethics versus consequential ethics and moral universalism and relativism, and try to apply those to sort of relevant topics in the international circle. So one group looked at the subtopic of human rights, and in the human rights, the group read a very famous paper by Peter Singer, Famine, Affluence, and Morality, where Singer makes an argument that we're morally obligated. Those people that are better off are morally obligated to give money to help raise those that are in poverty out of that poverty. It's a very controversial article, but it's very powerful, and Singer makes a pretty convincing argument for it. The other article read in the human rights section was an article by Martha Nussbaum, and it's about women's capabilities and social justice, and it's where Nussbaum talks about what she calls the capabilities approach, which is a term that she actually borrowed from Amartya Sen, who is a very famous economist at Harvard as well. And essentially what she tries to do in the article is argue for, instead of actually looking at human rights, she argues for using her capabilities approach, which instead of having a right, which she claims can be a bit problematic, she suggests that in international development people look at capabilities, meaning people have the ability to do things in certain societies. For example, the capability to find gainful employment or exercise your political will. So it's looked at more from the idea of what can I do, what am I allowed to do in this country, and she thinks that will provide a more egalitarian international system where people have sort of universal moral capabilities or rights, as she calls them. The second subtopic was just war theory, where we looked at two articles from a book by a philosopher named Michael Walzer. The book was called Just and Unjust Wars, and it's really a fantastic book, not just for those people that are interested in just war theory, but for people that are interested in morality and politics in general. It's a fantastic book, and I would highly recommend it. The first article in that was looking at accountability for war crimes, and it was looking specifically at the Nuremberg trials and Vietnam, and how accountable not only were the soldiers and the politicians who took place in those wars, but also the citizens who sort of implicitly went along with it by virtue of being a citizen of the country. It's really interesting. And the second article in Just War Theory was looking at what's called realism in international politics. There's a school that's a very famous school that dates back to Thucydides. When he's talking about the history of the Peloponnesian War, Thucydides mentions a very famous dialogue that took place between when the Athenians were conquering neighboring city-states. One of the islands that they conquered was Milos, and there was a very famous dialogue. It's called the Melian Dialogue, the Melian Debate, between the Athenian generals and the Melian statesmen, where essentially the Athenians say that might makes right. The strong are obligated to do what they can to conquer what they can, and the weak essentially have to give in, concede to the demands of the strong. Whereas the Melians actually appeal to justice, saying that there should be a standard of justice and conduct in international affairs. But of course the Athenians ignored that, and they ended up conquering, and Thucydides uses this as an example of what he thinks is the ethics in international affairs, which he believes is essentially the strong rule the weak. And Walzer also talks about Hobbes, and that Hobbes follows along the same lines as Thucydides. Hobbes is certainly a realist, where he talks about his state of nature, and the only way to get out of the state of nature is to enter into a type of political social contract with the, so you have the Leviathan, the state, which mitigates sort of the imminent danger that we all face by being in the state of nature, where he says that life is poor, brutish, in short. So that was the just war. And then the third subtopic that we looked at was environmental ethics, where we looked at a couple of articles from another great book by Peter Singer. I think it's his newest book. It's called One World: The Ethics of Globalization. So it's really fantastic, and I would highly suggest that if you guys have any interest in global ethics, it's a great book to look at. And then finally, we ended up with a case study from another. It was actually an extract or an excerpt from a book called Cosmopolitanism by a philosopher at Princeton, Kwame Appiah. And I really like him, and he touches on the topics that we've been talking about in this course quite a bit. The case for contamination, he essentially is trying to provide a way that in the 21st century we can still maintain cultural diversity and the rich cultural practices, but yet still have a type of human rights standard throughout the world, and become what he calls his cosmopolitans, which are essentially global citizens who believe in universal human rights, but yet still respect cultural boundaries and cultural practices. And that's where he draws a distinction between what he calls as the neo-fundamentalists and his cosmopolitans, and the difference that he points to between the two is a standard of tolerance. So really interesting article. Hope you guys enjoyed that. This week is going to be essentially devoted to you guys working on your final papers, and I wanted to say a little bit about the final paper in this video. It's I've posted some topics on the website for you guys to choose from, which essentially talk about the major themes of the course, which are categorical ethics, consequential ethics, universal rights, universal moral principles versus cultural relativism, and trying to apply those to the current international political scene. So those are a couple of boilerplate topics that you can choose. I've gotten emails from several people talking about potential paper topics. I've had some great suggestions on paper topics. It looks like they're going to be really interesting. In the syllabus, I have listed 8 to 10 pages. But what I want to say is, you guys take the amount of pages that you need to make a good quality argument. That's what I'm going to be grading the papers on. It's not going to be on the length of the paper. It's going to be on the quality of the argument. But I would say, certainly no less, let's say no less than 6 pages in the paper. I'm sure some of you will be relieved to hear that. But, I don't want you to get to a point where you're just finding filler to fill up pages. But I do want you to make a very thorough and well thought out argument. I'm not expecting you guys to do a ton of outside reading, because you just don't have the time to do it. I want you to primarily focus on the